At 5 in the morning on the last day of August, 2004, a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia stepped out the back of the restaurant to throw away the trash. Behind the dumpster, she found a naked man. He was sunburned. He was covered in fire ant bites. He was unconscious. And when the paramedics rolled him over, they found 3 deep depressions in his skull, the kind left by blunt force, by something heavy swung hard. Someone had beaten this man, stripped him, and left him behind a fast food restaurant to die. He lived, but when he finally opened his eyes in a Savannah hospital, something far stranger than the beating became clear. He had no idea who he was, not his name, not where he came from, not how old he was, not a single fact about his own life. The hospital had nothing to call him, so they wrote down the only thing they knew: King Doe. And that man, beaten, blind, with untreated cataracts, with no past, was about to become one of the strangest unsolved cases in modern American history. He stayed semi-conscious for weeks. When he finally spoke, he could tell the nurses things. He knew facts about the world, how to cook, how to run a kitchen, the names of cities. His mind worked. It just had a hole in the center of it, exactly the shape of himself. He thought he remembered the name Benjamin, spelled oddly with an extra A, but no last name would come. So he borrowed his own hospital nickname, the B and the K, and he called himself Benjamin Kyle. 9 months later, a charity paid for surgery on his cataracts. And when the bandages came off and Benjamin Kyle looked at himself clearly in a mirror for the first time, he got a shock. He was about 20 years older than he felt. The face looking back at him was a stranger's, and it was old. Then came the part that turns a sad story into something genuinely unsettling. They could not identify him, and not for lack of trying. The FBI ran his fingerprints. No match anywhere. Interpol checked internationally. Nothing. The U.S. Marshals went through cold cases. The Social Security Administration couldn't issue him a number because he couldn't prove he'd been born. And he couldn't prove he'd been born because he had no name. He was trapped inside a perfect loop. A living, breathing, talking human being who, as far as every government database on Earth was concerned, had never existed. Think about what that actually means. For the next 11 years, Benjamin Kyle could not legally rent an apartment. He could not hold a real job. He could not open a bank account, get a library card, board a plane, or see a doctor without paying cash. He became, in the words of the press, the only living person on the FBI's missing persons list. A man whose location was known every single day and whose identity was a total blank. So they put his face everywhere. Dr. Phil in 2008, CNN, Anderson Cooper, National Geographic. The Today Show ran his case 3 separate times. Tens of millions of people looked at this man's face on their screens. The whole country was, in a sense, trying to remember him for him. Nobody called. Not one person watching said, "I know that man." He took work that paid in cash. Washing dishes, mowing lawns, cooking at places that didn't ask questions. He slept in shelters, on couches, under bridges when the shelters were full. Years passed. The fingerprints, the media, the FBI, all of it had failed. By every conventional method, the man behind the Burger King simply could not be found because there was nothing to find. And then DNA did what 11 years of detective work couldn't. A forensic genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick took up the case, and later a specialist named Cece Moore. They didn't search for him directly. They searched for his relatives, running his DNA against public ancestry databases, building outward through cousins, then closer cousins, then finally a sibling. In late 2015, the work paid off. They had a name. William Burgess Powell, born August 29, 1948, in Lafayette, Indiana. He was 67 years old. He had a brother still living. And when they finally told him who he was, this man who had spent over a decade as a ghost, his only response was, "What?" He found it hard to believe. So did everyone else. Now here is where we separate what we know from what we don't. Because the answer to who is he only deepened the real mystery. Where had he been? Confirmed. William Powell was real. He grew up in Lafayette, Indiana, in a home his own brother described as marked by hoarding, alcohol, and abuse. And in 1976, when Powell was in his late 20s, he vanished. He abandoned his trailer, his possessions, his car. His license plates were removed. His family filed him as missing and, over the years, assumed he was dead. Social Security records show he worked odd jobs out west, in Boulder, Colorado, places he'd later half remember, through about 1983. And then, in 1983, William Powell disappears from the record completely. No employer, no tax filing, no address, no bank account, no traffic ticket, no hospital visit. For 21 years, from 1983 until the morning he turned up beaten behind that dumpster in 2004, there is no trace of him anywhere on Earth. 21 years, gone, and he claimed he couldn't remember any of it. Unconfirmed, and this is where it gets genuinely dark. From the very beginning, one of the doctors who examined him believed he was faking. That is on the record. A man who knew exactly who he was, deliberately performing a blank. And in 2026, a documentary crew that spent years on the case suggested the same thing, that the amnesia might have been a disguise. They raised questions, never proof. That Powell had reasons to disappear in 1976. That there were whispers of organized crime in his past. That the friend who drove west with him that year was, decades later, still afraid of him and wouldn't say why. None of it has been proven. Powell was never charged with anything. He has always maintained the memory loss was real, and doctors did diagnose him with a genuine dissociative condition. But consider the shape of it. A man flees his hometown in 1976, stripping the plates off his car. He erases himself from every record for 21 years, a feat almost impossible to pull off by accident. He resurfaces only because someone beat him half to death and dumped him unconscious, where he couldn't choose to stay hidden. And the one thing he could offer the world was that he remembered nothing at all. When his family finally brought him back to Lafayette, to the house he grew up in, they walked him up to the front door. He looked inside. Then he turned around, walked back to the car, and never set foot in it. A few years after he got his name back, William Powell went off the grid again. He stopped using the name. He stopped appearing on records. He'd be 77 years old now, and no one knows where he is. The man who forgot his entire life may have remembered every second of it. He just made sure the rest of us never would. So which is the real mystery? The 11 years he couldn't say who he was, or the 21 years before that, when he made certain no one could find him? Where was William Powell? And what was worth disappearing from for half a lifetime? He's the only one who knows, and he made sure it stays that way,